It all began on a Friday night. My wife, Stephanie, and I, who had been married for 8 years, received an invitation to her best friend Alice's birthday party. Alice and Stephanie had been close since their college days, and over the years, we had attended dozens of Alice's house parties. This one didn't seem any different from the rest. Stephanie looked stunning in her blue dress as we got ready. Her hair was styled perfectly, and the dress fit her figure like it was made for her. She turned to me and asked, "How do I look?" "As lovely as ever," I grinned in reply. Alice, overhearing us, laughed and teased, "Ben, you might just steal her spotlight tonight. It's her night, so don't do anything silly." We arrived at Alice's house around 8 p.m. The place was packed with people, some familiar and some new faces. Alice greeted us at the door, drink in hand, and immediately pulled Stephanie into a tight hug. "Ben, Stephanie, I'm so happy you could make it," she exclaimed. The party was in full swing, with music blasting and laughter echoing throughout the rooms. For a while, Stephanie and I stuck together, chatting with friends and enjoying a couple of drinks to relax. It was then that I saw him. He stood across the room, tall and confident, holding a whiskey glass. His eyes were fixed on Stephanie, and there was something unsettling about the way he looked at her. His broad shoulders and smug smile added to the uneasy feeling creeping over me. Whether it was the alcohol or my gut instinct, I wasn't sure, but something felt off. I nudged Stephanie and asked, "Who's that guy?" She followed my gaze and replied casually, "Oh, that's Ryan, Alice's friend. I think I met him last year at her housewarming." Ryan lifted his glass slightly toward us in acknowledgement. Stephanie gave a polite smile and looked back at me. "Don't be weird, Ben," she laughed. "Ryan's harmless. No reason to worry." I muttered to myself, "Yes, of course," but deep down, I wasn't entirely convinced. I tried to push the unsettling feeling aside, telling myself I was just being overly suspicious. Besides, Stephanie wasn't paying much attention to him. She was laughing and talking with some of her friends. As the evening went on, I lost sight of her in the crowd. I stayed close, trying not to overthink things, but I couldn't shake the nagging feeling. I scanned the room but couldn't find her. Alice was busy talking to a group near the dining area. I decided to ask Alice, trying to sound casual, "Hey, Alice, have you seen Stephanie?" Alice paused for a moment, as if recalling where she might have gone. "She was on her way to the kitchen," she replied. "The last time I saw her, she should have still been there." "Thank you," I said, walking toward the kitchen. As I turned the corner, I stopped in my tracks. There, standing at the counter, was Stephanie next to Ryan. He was leaning in just a little too much as they spoke, their heads nearly pressed together. With one hand holding her drink and the other lightly touching her necklace, Stephanie was laughing at something Ryan had said. I walked straight toward them, my fists clenched. "Stephanie," I said, my voice sharper than I intended. They both turned to face me. Stephanie's smile faltered for a moment. "Hey, Ben, what's going on?" she asked, her tone trying to stay casual. I looked directly at Ryan and said, "Mind if I interrupt?" Ryan raised his hands in a defensive gesture. "No issue, dude," he said. "We were just talking." I ignored him and focused entirely on Stephanie. "Can we talk?" She hesitated for a moment before nodding. "Sure." We walked back to the living room after she set down her drink. The sounds of music and laughter filled the air, but all I could think about was her. "Why were you with him in there?" I asked, keeping my voice low. She frowned, looking confused. "We were just talking. What's the big deal?" I tried to stay composed, but the frustration was clear in my voice. The way he was leaning in, it didn't seem like just a conversation, Stephanie. He was all over you. She folded her arms across her chest. "You're overreacting, Ben. I told you, Ryan is Alice's friend. All we were doing was talking." I shook my head in frustration. "The way he looks at you, it bothers me. It's disrespectful to our marriage. And to me." Stephanie's expression softened and she sighed. "If it bothers you, I apologize. But I assure you, nothing is going on. Can we just relax and enjoy the party? The sincerity in her eyes made me pause, and for a moment, I was about to back down. All right, I said, though the discomfort in my chest didn't go away. But don't encourage him. She nodded. All right. We returned to socializing, but the unease lingered, even as we rejoined the crowd. I tried to focus on other conversations, and even managed to laugh at a few jokes. Things seemed to return to normal for a while. After an hour or so, I found myself deep in conversation with a coworker who was also at the party. Stephanie excused herself to grab another drink. As time passed, I realized she hadn't returned. I glanced around the room, but couldn't spot her anywhere. I checked the kitchen to see if she was talking to Alice, but found no sign of her. I then moved on to the dining room, the patio, and even the small den where some people were playing cards, but Stephanie was nowhere to be found. A strange sense of unease crept over me as I moved further from the crowd. The sounds of laughter and muffled voices began to fade as I made my way down the hallway toward the bedrooms. The corridor felt eerily quiet. Here is your passage rewritten while preserving every word and improving the flow. The last time I saw her, she should still have been there. Thank you, I said, making my way toward the kitchen. As I turned the corner, I froze. There, standing at the counter, was Stephanie, right next to Ryan. He was leaning in just a little too close as they spoke, their heads nearly touching. Stephanie held her drink in one hand, while the other lightly brushed her necklace. She was laughing at something Ryan had said. I strode toward them, my fists clenched. Stephanie, I said, my voice sharper than I intended. They both turned to face me. For a moment, Stephanie's smile faltered. Hey, Ben, what's going on? She asked, her tone attempting to remain casual. I looked directly at Ryan and said, Mind if I interrupt? Ryan put his hands up in a defensive manner. No issue, dude, he said. We were just talking. Ignoring him completely, I focused on Stephanie. Can we talk? She hesitated for a moment, then nodded. Sure. We walked back to the living room after she set down her drink. The music and laughter filled the air, but all I could think about was her. Why were you with him in there? I asked, speaking quietly. She frowned, a bit confused. We were just talking. What's the big deal? I tried to stay composed, but my frustration leaked through. The way he was leaning in, it didn't seem like just a conversation, Stephanie. He was all over you. She folded her arms across her chest. You're overreacting, Ben. I told you, Ryan is Alice's friend. We were just talking. I shook my head, frustration building. The way he looks at you, it bothers me. It's disrespectful to our marriage. And to me. Stephanie's expression softened and she sighed. If it bothers you, I'm sorry. But I promise you, nothing is happening. Can we just relax and enjoy the party? Her sincerity made me hesitate, and for a moment, I almost backed down. All right, I said, though the discomfort in my chest didn't fade. But don't encourage him. She nodded. All right. We returned to socializing, but the unease still lingered. Even as we mingled with the crowd, my mind kept going back to the moment in the kitchen. I tried focusing on other conversations, and I even managed to laugh at a few jokes. For a while, it seemed like things were returning to normal. After about an hour, I was deep in conversation with a coworker who was also at the party. Stephanie excused herself to grab another drink. As time passed, I realized she hadn't come back. I glanced around, but couldn't find her anywhere. I went to the kitchen to check if she was talking to Alice, but there was no sign of her. I moved on to the dining room, the patio, and even the small den where some people were playing cards, but Stephanie was nowhere to be found. A strange sense of unease began to settle over me as I stepped farther from the crowd. The sounds of laughter and voices started to fade as I made my way down the hallway toward the bedrooms. The corridor felt unnervingly quiet, and all the doors were shut. I paused at the first door and pressed my ear against it, but there was no movement or sound. Every time I strained to hear something, anything, the rooms remained silent. I moved on to the next door. Passing the restroom on my way, I came to the final door. Through the heavy wooden door, I could faintly hear voices. I pressed closer, trying to make out the words, my heartbeat quickening. After a few seconds, I recognized the voice of a woman, laughing and talking, but it wasn't Stephanie. I approached the final door, relieved yet still uneasy. I stood there, my heart thumping in my chest. At first, there was nothing but silence. Then I heard Stephanie's laugh, clear and soft. My stomach churned, and the laughter stopped, replaced by something else. Faint whispers followed by the unmistakable sound of moans. My hand hovered over the door, my entire body feeling like the ground beneath me was crumbling. The doorknob trembled as an overwhelming surge of anger and heartache washed over me. I inhaled deeply, gathering my strength before opening the door, and everything shattered. My wife was lying on the bed with Ryan, tangled in the sheets. His shirt was unbuttoned, and her dress was off. At first, neither of them noticed me. Unable to comprehend what I was seeing, I stood motionless. Stephanie's head jerked toward me, her eyes wide with surprise. I spoke, barely above a whisper, my voice shaking with rage. God forbid! Ryan leaned back against the headboard, completely unconcerned. It's not what it looks like, man. Calm down. I let out a bitter laugh. Not what it appears to be. Really? Is that your best defense? Tears streamed down Stephanie's face as she hurried to cover herself with the sheet. Then allow me to clarify. My chest felt like it was about to burst. I shook my head, turned, and hurried out of the room. How could she do this to me? To us? She trailed behind me down the hallway. Ben, please stop. I made a mistake. I wasn't thinking. I spun around to face her. Oh, so now it's the alcohol's fault? When you smiled at him across the room, you were thinking just fine. Don't act like this just happened. She flinched. I didn't mean to. I love you, Ben. I yelled. For this to happen, you say you love me? Stephanie, you don't degrade someone you love this way. You don't betray them like this. The disturbance was starting to get noticed by the other partygoers. Alice came over, a worried expression on her face. What's going on? She asked, looking between us. I shot back, icy and firm. Ask your friend. She has a lot to explain. Sobbing, Stephanie buried her face in her hands. Alice glanced at her, then back at me. In an attempt to calm things down, Alice said, Ben, let them speak in private. I grabbed my coat and said, I'm done talking. Enjoy the rest of your gathering. Without another word, I walked outside and climbed into my car, gripping the steering wheel with trembling hands. Hours passed as I drove aimlessly, desperately trying to process what had just happened. My mind was consumed with images of Stephanie and Ryan, each one more vivid than the last. I was caught in a whirlwind of emotions, anger, guilt, pain, but no answers. I knew I had to figure things out, but after everything, I had no desire to return home. I drove for what felt like an eternity, needing to escape her, needing space to think. My phone buzzed, and my mind raced. Stephanie's name flashed on the screen. I ignored it. I wasn't ready to speak to her yet. Over and over, she called. My stomach twisted more each time I saw her name. I just couldn't bring myself to answer her. Finally, I reached Damon's house. He was one of the few people I could rely on, and at almost 2 a.m., I needed to talk to someone. I knocked on his door. What the hell, Ben? It's late, Damon said, his voice groggy as he opened the door. I'm sorry for coming so late, man, but I need to talk. It's an emergency, I said in a shaky voice, feeling my emotions on the verge of spilling over. Damon looked at me with concern, sensing the urgency. I know I need to talk to someone, but I don't know how to explain it, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. I hesitated as I moved to make space for myself, my hands shaking with uncertainty. Slowly, I sat down on the couch as we entered the living room. Damon positioned himself across from me, his face filled with concern. Trying to steady my breath before I spoke, I inhaled deeply. "She betrayed me," I whispered, my voice barely audible. "I saw her with him." "Damien," I added, the name barely leaving my lips. I had glimpsed them together in the bedroom. It was undeniable. The image of them, so close to one another, kept replaying in my mind. I couldn't bring myself to say more. Damon sat still, his face blank, showing a mix of shock and disbelief. "I can't believe this, man," he murmured, the weight of the situation heavy on him. I nodded in agreement. I couldn't believe it either. I don't even know what to do anymore. I could just go home, but I can't face her. "Maybe I should check into a hotel for the night," I said, feeling crushed under the weight of everything. I was disoriented, lost in my own thoughts, unable to see a clear way forward. After giving me some time to gather myself, Damon finally spoke up. "A hotel? Are you out of your mind? You don't need to be alone right now. Stay here tonight. You don't have to go anywhere." I stared at him, still trying to process everything. "Are you sure?" I asked quietly, still unsure of myself. "Yes," he replied firmly. "You're not leaving." Grateful but still overwhelmed, I nodded. "Thanks, man." I sat back, running my hand through my hair, trying to collect my scattered thoughts. But the constant buzzing of my phone broke my concentration. Stephanie was calling again. I couldn't bring myself to answer, though my fingers hovered over the screen. The call went to voicemail, but then another one came through immediately. Damon noticed and spoke up. "She's been calling ever since you left. You should probably answer." "I can't," I muttered, staring at the screen as the calls kept coming. They were like constant reminders of the betrayal I was living through. I felt numb, just staring at the phone. Breaking the silence, Damon asked, "What are you going to do now?" I let out a heavy sigh, my chest tight. "I'm going to file for divorce," I said, the words feeling more like a final decision than an uncertain thought. Despite my lingering doubts, something inside me told me it was the right move. Damon nodded. "I know a good attorney. If you want, I can give you his contact." "Thanks, man. That really helps," I said, my voice quiet but sincere. The next morning, I knew I had to return to the house. I couldn't avoid it forever. When I walked through the front door, I knew it wouldn't be easy. I only needed a few things, mostly clothes. Stephanie was sitting on the couch, her eyes swollen from crying. When she saw me, she stood up quickly. "We need to talk, Ben," she said, her voice trembling. I didn't answer immediately. I simply walked past her, heading upstairs to the bedroom. I grabbed a jacket, some pants, and a couple of shirts. I could feel her eyes on me, following my every move. When I turned, she was standing in the doorway. "Ben, I didn't mean for this to happen," she said, her voice filled with regret. "We can fix this, please. It was a mistake. You have to understand that." Still holding my clothes, I looked at her, my voice low but firm. "A mistake, Stephanie? This is how you see it." She couldn't meet my gaze, her eyes filled with guilt. I could see it in her face, but nothing had changed. My heart tightened in my chest as the weight of it all sank in. I couldn't shake the image from my mind. The moment I saw you with him, it haunted me, replaying over and over again. I couldn't stay in this place anymore. I knew what I had to do. I was filing for divorce. Stephanie's face drained of color when I said it. "Please, Ben, I'm so sorry," she pleaded, her voice breaking. "Give me one more chance. I'll do whatever it takes to make things right." With a heavy heart, I simply shook my head. "No, it's too late." I gathered the last of my belongings, turned away, and left without looking back. There was no turning around now. Once in the car, the reality hit me. I couldn't keep living a lie, but I didn't know what would come next. The divorce was finalized in a few months. During that time, Stephanie reached out a couple of times, but I couldn't bring myself to answer. I needed to heal, to move on. Damon stood by me through it all, offering support and guiding me through the entire process. Over time, things started to settle. While the pain never fully disappeared, I learned to manage it. I focused on rebuilding my life, and despite how hard it was, I didn't regret walking away. It wasn't easy, but there was no other choice. Thank you for being there to watch my journey.